I just want to start by saying what a pleasure it is to be here talking about this, and how stunned I am that places like this room, and places like this room of people at Educator Summit in Taiwan last year, you are the people dedicating your careers to making coffee better through knowledge. And it might seem like an obvious question, but it's really important to consider why research is important to the coffee sector. And it's because it makes coffee more flavoursome. Literally, through learning more, we can make coffee taste better. It can make it more fun, right? It's so fun to learn a new skill in coffee and apply it. But importantly, it can make coffee more equitable. When we learn something and we apply it in the right way, it can make coffee more resilient, from the trees to the people who work with it, and it helps our entire sector to thrive. We're so lucky to work in a sector where chemists, they can go to a lab and they can analyze those thousands of chemical compounds that are responsible for coffee's flavor. How cool is that? But how cool is it that we then get to go to people in this room, consumers and coffee professionals, and say, okay, of all of these complex flavors, what are the ones that you enjoy and why do you enjoy it? And I know we have some anthropologists in the room here, and so you don't need to know this, but I also want to remind you that research, it doesn't need to happen in a lab. It doesn't only happen in a university. In this image here, this is Maria Paz Lobo, and she is interviewing a producer called Marilena Rodriguez in Peru, in the region of Amazonas, about how EU deforestation laws created in Brussels, Belgium, all the way on the other side of the world, about how those will affect her lives. So we're going from the lab to the field and everywhere in between, and everything is important to us. And now, we know that research is important, right? But sometimes it can feel a long way away. When we're working on our shift, when we're dialing in our coffee, we have 10 minutes and the first customer is already at the door. But I was curious, could I have a show of hands, please? Okay, let's say, who has created a drink, like a specialty drink at your cafe or your workplace? Like who has taught somebody how to make coffee? I feel like some people in this room, you've taught people to make coffee. It doesn't have to be as an AST or an SCA for Cuppers course, but we've taught people to make coffee. The way we dial in our espresso in the morning, that's informed by research. If you've ever entered a coffee competition, it could be a super informal one between your colleagues at work, or it could be something like the World Brewers Cup that's happening just behind us. You see the ways that research and science have informed these parts of our career. That's part of why we're growing and innovating. But we know it's important. We know that we'd like to learn more. But sometimes it can just feel so hard to access that knowledge that we want, right? Sometimes it can feel like traveling through a maze of Google Scholar search engines, however you're trying to find relevant research. And then sometimes you get there, you finally find a paper that says, okay, yes, it speaks to specialty coffee. It speaks to what I need. Because there's a lot of amazing food science research out there, for example, right? But not all of it is super applicable to specialty coffee. And sometimes we find that and we say, yes, this is what I wanted to read. And we scroll down, and then we can read the first paragraph before we hit the paywall. And then from there, we often, even if we are a member of a scientific journal and we can access it, there are other barriers to access. Language barriers, translation barriers, but also often really technical jargon. And so it can feel like an impossible task, even when we have all of that enthusiasm. So one of my key missions today is to talk a little bit about what we can do to try and make this knowledge more accessible. And ironically, I asked ChatGPT to generate this image for me. I said, please create a maze where someone has to navigate it to find research at the end, and I do not think you can solve this maze. I do not think there is a way through this maze. So let's find one, right? And so, what do we mean by knowledge development at the SCA? It sounds kind of a little bit abstract and theoretical, right? And I want to start with our primary purpose, which is to make coffee better. Again, a little bit abstract. So what does that mean in practice? It means cultivating curiosity and chasing that curiosity into new areas for learning by using our connections and our resources to listen for the questions that the sector is asking and understanding the challenges that you're facing. What it doesn't mean is that we have all the answers. We do not have all the answers, and I'm very glad of that. Rather, what it means is that we dedicate our efforts to collaborating with researchers, partners, members, and institutional partners to investigate the pertinent questions. We want to find out what people are asking, and then collaborate with those who have the knowledge, and here I'm talking about sort of formal knowledge, but also lived experience, the resources are necessary to help answer coffee's mysteries. And finally, as I said before, we know that sharing knowledge with the community isn't the end of the journey. We need to sort of follow that knowledge through the maze, out into the world, learning how people build tools with it, learning how perhaps it doesn't work in some circumstances or contexts. We want to follow it and work with it and see how it evolves outside of the bubble. Because knowledge learning, it isn't a simple or a top-down process. So, and all of this is in service of, and I don't know why it's not showing here, but it's fine, our main mission, which is to make specialty coffee a thriving, equitable, and sustainable activity for the entire value chain. But, and this was a little confusing to me when I first started. So we have the SCA, and we have the Coffee Science Foundation. And so what exactly is the Coffee Science Foundation, and what is its relationship to the SCA? Now, the Coffee Science Foundation was founded in 2019, and it was in response to a real lack of research on specialty coffee. Just as I said before, sometimes you're on Google Scholar, you're looking for that information that's super relevant, and I discovered, for example, that melons, tomatoes, wine, cheese, these are all sectors that have so much more research dedicated to them than specialty coffee. And so the Coffee Science Foundation was founded primarily in response to this lack of resources. It was also in response to our sustainability agenda in 2019, where we committed to making knowledge accessible with the purpose of creating a more equitable sector. And so there are so many mysteries in coffee. What makes it taste so delicious? How can we make coffee taste better and do better in the world? And through the Coffee Science Foundation, we hope to advance the understanding of coffee and secure its future through research, knowledge building, and outreach. And it takes us back to this dilemma, right? And so, with the Coffee Science Foundation, we aim to produce research that's trustworthy, applicable to specialty coffee, into your work, into your lives, and accessible. And we do that through three primary ways. we engage in what we call pre-competitive research. And it sounds kind of like a tricky term, so let's compare it to the opposite, which is competitive or proprietary research. And so competitive research that's often commissioned by private companies, the aim is for them to perhaps be able to develop their own products. It's for their commercial gain. And the pharmaceutical industry is the classic and infamous, I would say, example of this. So we aim to do the opposite. Pre-competitive research is usually designed to begin tackling some of the foundational or basic questions that a lot of different collaborators have an interest in. It's designed to benefit a lot of different people, and often pre-competitive research, it's published with the aim of someone taking that and then running with it, taking it and applying it to their next idea, using that momentum to investigate further and deeper, and maybe even conduct a study that challenges it. So we engage in pre-competitive research. We don't have any paywalls on our content. All of the recent research all of the research that we've conducted is open access, and then everything that we've collaborated on recently, there are no paywalls, and we're working on previous older collaborations on removing the paywalls to that as well. And that, I think, for anyone engaged in academic research, I know some scholars, for example, who have been working on the Canafora flavor wheel, on a new flavor wheel surrounding Robusta Canafora. And they had to privately fundraise to raise thousands of US dollars to make their research available to the public. So anybody out there who is able to, and it's difficult to, full kudos to them for raising, I think, around 5,000 US dollars to make their research publicly accessible. And then finally, we try to have everything as much as possible in accessible language. And so one way that we do that, for example, is every time we collaborate on research, we publish a version of it in 25. It's free to read online, and then we really aim to tackle those really complex graphs with 4 axes and lots of dots and lots of technical jargon and explain it in a way that I can understand, at least, so hopefully can share to the world. And all of this, it can be pretty complicated. And that's why I would like to introduce you to Mirna Nagy. She's the person here on the right-hand side. Here she is so excited to be joining her first cupping. I don't know if people remember their first cupping, but I love this photo because it captures the beauty of learning and cupping for the first time. And Mirna says that the project manager's role is to be mindful of the big picture. So sometimes we're collaborating with a lot of different researchers. Currently we have a project where they're collaborating between Guatemala, Brazil, Switzerland, and the US. And she is there to manage all of those connections, all of those expectations, to send the samples around the world to make sure everyone can analyze them. And really her role is, it's not to be in the lab, it's to give everyone the resources and the support they need so they can use their unique talents. So this is Mirna. And so, to sort of start finishing this introductory section, I asked my colleague Peter Giuliano, who is the Coffee Science Foundation, he's the head of the Coffee Science Foundation, and he's the Chief Research Officer at the SCA, and I said, why both organizations? Why do we need both the SCA and the Coffee Science Foundation? And he said to me, do you know what? It's because scientists are really good at being scientists. They're good at doing their job, they can do really complex analysis, they can control for variables, they can conduct really rigorous research, but sometimes they don't ask the right questions. Have you ever found an academic research paper that's very good, they're clearly very talented, but you think, okay, when will I ever apply this to my job? And so that's when our partnership with the Specialty Coffee Association comes in. Because at the SCA, we are accountable to the community. We're a member organization. And what coffee professionals, like yourselves, are really good at is asking the good questions. You know what you need, right? You know maybe the challenges you're facing. You also know what you already know and don't need to be told again. You maybe have the lived experience to contribute. It could be lived experience from your own life or even sort of ancestral or indigenous knowledge that you have been raised around that you can contribute. So it's this combination of the Specialty Coffee Association and the Coffee Science Foundation. Wow, I need to use acronyms, they're very long. That is really powerful. I think that's how we get innovation. That's how we turn research into knowledge. And another way that you could look at this is sometimes when we try and think about our role at the SCA, we're a little bit like a processing mill. We take the raw material, in this case the knowledge, the complex knowledge, we let it ferment into something tasty through discussions, through collaborations, and then we want to check that it's sort of stable and sound and ready to export to the world. And so we see ourselves sort of in the middle as facilitators of this process, right? From gathering information to working with our community, to share it in things like standards, like 25 magazine, education, curriculum, etc. And so it's all been pretty theoretical up to this point, but now I want to dig into 3 very different examples of research that we've been working on. And the first, it's research that we worked on roast color, so the color of roasted coffee. And now this is one of those ones where if you're a roaster, you might say, oh yes please. If you're not a roaster, maybe you wonder why it's relevant. And so I want to start with sort of a question to help us answer that. So we have this image here, and I admit I asked ChatGPT to generate it, and I asked it for a reason. I said, please show me a light roasted, a medium roasted, and a dark roasted coffee. And it seems to have done a pretty good job, right? There are 3 different roast labels here. But have you ever had a reality where you have walked into a cafe, a roastery, anywhere, and ordered, for example, what you described as a light roasted coffee and received something entirely different to your expectations? Or maybe, I don't know, you ordered a blonde roasted coffee at somewhere else and also received something that maybe according to your perception, you were not expecting at all, right? So the reality can look a little bit like this. And why this is important is because we know that consumers really value this description of roast color when they make their decisions. In a national data survey from last year in the US, 70% of consumers said that they use words about roast color to help them make their decisions. So it's very clearly important. It also has an impact on the sensory profile of the coffee we're drinking. We know that. And so it seems like a pretty serious challenge that we know this is an important metric, but we do not have a universal standard for measuring roast color in coffee. In fact, one of the most common ways that we measure color in coffee comes from the tomato industry. And the most common method for measuring coffee color actually comes from a scale to measure tomato ripeness. And so what we did is we discovered that Probat and UC Davis in California at their Coffee Science Center, they were already conducting really amazing, extensive research about roasted coffee. They were analyzing hundreds of different samples to assess their chemistry, weight, all sorts of different characteristics of the coffee. And we went to them and we said, hey, can we join too? Could you take this research that you're doing across all these hundreds of samples and measure the roast color with the aim of trying to find a universal definition of roast color in coffee, so that when people perhaps order a light roasted coffee, they can get something a little bit closer to their expectations? So we started that. We started a collaboration. And one of the most important things we realized is, again, we needed to step out of the lab. We wanted to work with the people that this is going to affect the most. In this case, it's coffee roasters, right? So we conducted research with about 350 different people. They popped their heads into these cool little light boxes and looked at the 9 coffees here, all different shades of coffees. It's almost hard to believe with some of them that they're coffees. And we asked them, okay, what words, what colors would you use to describe these coffees? And between them, can you pick a light, a medium, and a dark roast? And guess what? They were completely divided, just like we know about the sector. And so, I'm sorry for this, I'm gonna kind of lead you towards a tempting result and then not reveal it. But I don't have time to get into the results today. What I can tell you is that we have really, really promising early results, that there is something we could call a universal roast color curve in coffee. What you can do is, in a previous issue of 25, we have this article which helps explain this very cool 3D graph up here, and shares so Laudia, she was one of the key scientists working on this. So I really encourage you to go and read it. But what I do want to share is a little bit about, okay, what is the potential impact of this research? Why should we care about it, even if you're not a roaster? And so the first is remembering the consumers, right? If 70% of them, at least in the US, are looking for roast color to help define what their purchase is, we want to be working with them, right? The second is, think about its applications throughout the value chain. I don't know if any of you buy green coffee, for example, or cup samples of green coffee. And I personally know so many instances where we bought a really, really amazing coffee from a producer. We roasted it and we cupped it, and we were cupping it at a totally different roast level to them. And so when we were trying to communicate ideas about flavors and sensory descriptions, we were way off. Imagine if people could use this across the value chain to check that they're collaborating and cupping on the same level. And then finally, I think about it in terms of peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. So sharing with your colleagues, gosh, even with your competitors sometimes. When I was a roaster, we always wanted to compare with other roasters. And not in a competitive way, but in a sharing and learning kind of way. Imagine if, I don't know, the roastery down the road, you know they bought the same coffee as you, and you could say, okay, how are you roasting it? What color are you roasting it to? And what does it taste like? So much learning to be had there. Now, I want to take you to the second project that I want to talk about. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's just a little something we've been working on. And I know that we think a lot about the CVA as something that you do, right? And that's really important to know that, okay, it's something I can learn, I can practice, I can embody it, I can literally participate in it whenever I'm at the cupping table, or actually whenever I drink a coffee. But what we often don't talk about is how the CVA is the result of years and years of research, collaboration with the community, and how it reflects some of the latest sensory science. And so, I want to start with a little timeline. And so, The CBA has had a really long brew time, if you will. It has been percolating for a very long time. We're starting in 2020, but actually, realistically, this starts, let's say 20 years ago. Basically, as soon as the 2004 cupping form was created, people like my colleagues, Dr. Mario Fernandez and Peter Giuliano, they are thinking about cupping all the time, believe me. And so, in 2020, in response, and somebody earlier asked, okay, actually, what was the agenda behind CBA? What was the motivation? And I can speak to that a little. It was in response to our new sustainability agenda that emerged out of an especially severe price crisis in coffee in 2019. And in that sustainability agenda, we outlined that we wanted to make information sharing more equitable. We wanted to promote and support new models for cupping and coffee trading, and we wanted to improve producers' access to market information, because we know that information about the market, it drives value, it creates bargaining power. And finally, we wanted to enable more two-way communication, right? So not just communicating and setting expectations in one direction down the value chain, but mutual exchange of information. And so this literature review, it took about 2 years, and it was really also in response to this idea of, okay, it's so hard to find coffee research. It's so hard to find the specialty coffee research that feels sort of relevant and scientifically sound. And the aim was to do that and sort of put as much as we could of it in one place, which is the Sensory and Cupping Handbook. And from there, we turn to this participatory element. We recognize that any new system, any new research needs to engage with the people it's going to affect the most. And so we launched an online survey. We finally call it Cuppy. It got a nickname within our team because it's so big. And amazingly, we received over 1,500 responses to the survey from 86 different countries. So we were really impressed at sort of the global reach of the survey. And as you can see here on the map, the top responses were from Mexico, the US, Taiwan, and Korea. And one of the key learnings, just one of them in this survey, was that people expressed a really strong desire to be able to record coffee sweetness. In the 2000 form, there wasn't an easy and obvious way to record what we thought about a coffee sweetness. So that's a big reason why we added a sweetness category to both the descriptive and the effective assessments. From there, we started a collaboration with an organization called World Coffee Research, a really esteemed institution who focus mainly on coffee genetics. And they wanted to find a way, as they were researching new varieties, creating even new varieties, to cup them and say, okay, does this have the characteristics that I want? They wanted a really fast and simple way to describe coffee. And so, at the same time, we were discussing this with them, and we realized we wanted to test something very similar. We wanted to test the idea of kata boxes, so check that all that apply boxes. And we said, okay, why don't we conduct some research together? And so, with World Coffee Research, we conducted cuppings in Guatemala, in Korea, in Colombia, and we tested this idea of kata boxes to great success. We had really, really good results. And World Coffee Research also found that they supported this idea of describing coffee quickly and effectively. One other thing that we learned was these were groups of expert cuppers in this group. And their preferences diverged, even within the same group. So not just between Korea and Guatemala, for example, but also within each group. And so we really saw among some of the greatest cuppers in the world, again, this diversity of preferences. And then something that we always do with any new initiative is pilot testing. And so throughout the entire process of the CVA, we've been running pilots. So basically, opportunities to test something for real learners to go to, for example, a course and test it. And so we did that with the early CVA courses right up until this year with our Intro to Cupping course. This is one happening in Mexico. We also took in a lot of feedback from early adopters, so people who agreed to take the CVA early from all around the world and try it out. And then finally, and this is something that I really want to share with this room, is that we always have consultations with expert groups. And this means in practice that actually anyone can apply to be part of this expert group, and I want to show you how to do that at the end of this session, because this is also about giving you access to participate. And so basically, experts from around the world in all different fields. And when I say expert, it's because you have experience in it. I don't mean solely PhD students. I mean people who have experience in this sector. And to give you an example of how this works in practice, this is just some of the 60 pages of feedback we received from experts on a recent standard. And so basically, what it means is that we go through all of this feedback. My colleague, Dr. Mario, he takes it really earnestly because these perspectives are really important to him. So he goes through all of this feedback, he answers everybody's questions, and he incorporates their feedback. Maybe if two people had contradictory or contrasting feedback, he'll start a dialogue with them, find out what they mean. And so every time we draft a standard, this is a really big part of the process. And so just as a reminder, I'll show you how to apply to be part of this expert group in the future. So, that was kind of the timeline of the CVA thus far. And it has so far to go. And then, what is really exciting is that this person here on the left, the other excited person in this photo, my colleague Chelsea Dubay, she's our curriculum development director. What this means is when people like Mario and Peter, again scientists who are really good at thinking about the theory, Chelsea takes that and she applies it to practice. So she has to ask the really interesting questions about how can I turn this into education. And she said for her the focus is unpacking the results, what it means in practice for coffee professionals. So with the CVA, for example, how can I assess this? How can someone think, okay, I can do this task in my job? And we're on to the third and final example. And this one, again, is something quite different because I wanted to give you sort of a big overview from the super technical, like rose color, through to the research we do that is really about human experience and perceptions. Because one important part of knowledge development is never assuming that we have all the answers. As part of our sustainability agenda, we launched a multi-year project on value distribution. So our aim was to try and understand how value is distributed within the coffee sector. Actually, what is value in the coffee sector? What do people believe is valuable? And do they believe they can access it? Do they believe somebody else can access it more easily than they can? And so this was the purpose of this particular project. But before we can start sharing current, actionable, and context-specific knowledge about value and equity, we needed to understand the realities of specialty coffee. So for this reason, it was really important for us to understand people's perceptions of what value is. And for us, understanding perceptions is vitally important. Sometimes in academia, when you say you want to understand people's perspectives, their opinions, their views, sometimes people push back and say, no, but if their perspectives don't align with reality, why would we want to know them, or why are they valid? And we say, actually, they're really valid. Perceptions, they teach us about how a system is working in practice. And so, remember what I was saying about accessing knowledge, for example. You could say, okay, technically, there's a lot of scientific knowledge out there about coffee. But if we perceive, and I perceive that as difficult to access, that's important, right? If you are having the lived experience, then that is informing us about the reality and showing us that we need to make changes to make things more accessible. And we could say the same with value. Theoretically, there is so much value out there in the coffee sector, but if people believe they cannot access it, then that is their lived reality, and that is important, and we need to do something about it. And so, we launched a survey with 4 key aims. We wanted to expand our collective understanding of value and how it is distributed. We wanted to understand if there was a difference between how people believe coffee's value is distributed, so their perception of reality at the time, how is it, compared to how they think it should be distributed. And I think we can all probably relate to that, right? It's okay, we have an understanding of how it is, but maybe we wish it could be different. And understanding that hope or that aspiration or that desire is really important. And from there we needed to start switching it into something a little bit more practical and say, okay, what metrics can we actually use? So if we're aiming for something, how do we check that we're achieving it? How do we check that we are working towards this goal? And then finally, what practices can we develop and adopt to make coffee a more thriving, equitable, and sustainable endeavor? And this project is led by my colleague Andres Montenegro, and he says that the survey aims to understand and share our collective perception of value. Our perceptions hugely impact what we pay attention to, what we value, and how we make individual decisions that shape our businesses, organizations, and how the industry operates. And so, due to the nature of this project, we thought it was really, really important to supplement. We have the survey with the global sort of high-level data, and we hosted a focus group in Guatemala on the same topics, but we said, okay, we need to have smaller, more intimate dialogues. We need to have discussions where people are in conversation. Maybe they're challenging each other, maybe they're supporting each other, maybe they're trusting and supporting each other to speak about value in coffee. And so, thus far we've conducted these dialogues in Mexico, in Cote d'Ivoire, the US, and also here in Jakarta. And I was lucky enough, and I really say it was a very moving experience. I truly felt privileged to be there to facilitate one of these conversations, the one here on the left in Mexico. It's something that's named the Women-Powered Coffee Summit. And during this dialogue, someone shared something that I think is really, really pertinent for today's conversation. And we were talking about the role of gender in how coffee's value is distributed. And she said, okay, my perception is that even though I feel really skilled and really competent in processing, in agronomy and farm management, I have the skill set, I have the knowledge, but what I don't have access to is information about the market, about market expectations, about price expectations, about trading expectations. And I think that is really, really common sentiment. And she said, no matter how skilled I become, if people are not willing to share and exchange this information about the market with me, I have reduced bargaining power, and that impacts my livelihood. And so this was one of these really sort of key light bulb aha moments where we understand why perceptions are really important. And to me, it's a reminder why it's so important to have information available, whether that's sort of plain language research on rose colour, whether that's sort of expanding how we got to where we are with the CVA and explaining it, or whether that's market information. Because in a spirit of collaboration and equity, that is how we can make coffee better for everyone. At the SCA and Coffee Science Foundation, we know that publishing the information isn't enough. You can put it on our website, just leave it there, but we need to make sure it's reaching the right people. And if not, how can we identify, remove barriers to access? It reminds me that transparency in the coffee supply system, it's not a destination. It's just like sustainability. We don't reach some point and then we're transparent. It's a journey, it's a process, it's a real ongoing act to not just share information, but think about how we're sharing it and why and to whom. So, I'll come back to this, but one of the key things I want to do today was to finish by inviting you to participate in some of these initiatives. And the first one that you can do is you can participate in this year's survey on equitable value distribution. At the moment it is, and this is something we do need to reflect on. I'm talking about accessibility, language. The moment it is in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. It will be coming out in Chinese and Korean soon. But this is something I want to openly acknowledge. If I'm here talking about information accessibility and research accessibility, translation is something that we absolutely need to think about. And I don't have the perfect answer here, other than that we're thinking about it and we're not perfect and it's important to us. You can participate in this survey. I would really invite you to do so. Other things that you can do, and don't worry, you don't need to get it right now. I can share the QR codes with you. But if you're a researcher or you're a real expert in your field, I'd invite you to check the Coffee Science Foundation website every now and again. We have calls to engage in research, paid research, and we really, really welcome applications from around the world. And maybe some of these projects, they seem a little bit daunting. I encourage you to write to us to say, okay, I had this in mind. You can seek reassurance and guidance from us and ask questions before you have to do that scary thing that involves sending off an application. Engage with us, ask us questions. On that note, I really welcome pitches for Work on 25. This is our biannual publication. And if you're working on something, again, you do not have to be in academia. If you're working on something that's really important to you, and you think is of interest to the coffee community, send us a pitch, and that QR code will take you there. And I can guarantee you that those emails will be answered, because that's me. I'll answer them. So I would really welcome that. And think outside the box. Think about something that you're seeing in your local community that's impactful and you find interesting. Because the most interesting thing to me is why you like it. Why are you writing to me about this? It doesn't have to be accredited academic research. I'm interested in your why. You can contribute, as I said, for example, to drafting and pitching standards. So standards are those really foundational documents that I talked about, like Dr. Mario Fernandez authors. But standards, we see them as a foundation that we build from. And so you can be one of those people sending your responses in those 60 pages of information to Mario, and I promise you that he takes it seriously. Those are read. And then finally, as I said, you can participate in the Equitable Value Distribution Survey. So, to finish, I thought about sort of taking some of our copy from our websites for this last slide, but actually I wanted to write it myself, because I really believe it. I think that with accessible, incredible knowledge that's informed by diverse realities, so not just one market, not just one context, the coffee sector can develop innovative mindsets to collectively problem solve our challenges. Brewing and sharing knowledge means that we can better understand the coffee that we farm, we trade, we brew, and we enjoy collaborating to make coffee better. Thank you.